So Izzy, welcome to NHL-timmen. I have to start by saying congratulations on winning the Red Fisher Award. It was obviously a big year for Washington, both on the ice and in the press box.
Yeah, thank you. They want to go back to back and win another Stanley Cup, so I need to try and do the same with this award or win it again next year.
So, what do you think made you win this prize? What was it that made they pick you?
Geez, I don't know. I try to write stuff that's different or unique or more on the human interest side. I think nowadays fans really want to know more about the athletes. They cheer on and they buy their jerseys. They want to know more about them as people, and I kind of try to get to that side of it, and tell more stories that are kind of bigger than just hockey, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of that, obviously you traveled quite a bit this summer following the Cup around. I would like you to start to tell our listeners about your time in Moscow with Ovetjkins and his day with the Cup. What was that like?
It was pretty hectic. I feel like these Cup days, you get a vibe for kind of the player's personality, but also for the city. And both Ovetjkin and Moscow are very, flashy and kind of over the top. So kind of his Cup day was the same way. And he had these parties with like all these kind of Russian celebrities there. And there were thousands and thousands of people at his whatever event he brought the Cup to. The World Cup was going on at the same time in Russia, so it was kind of especially crazy and an exciting time there. World Cup had like a fan fest at Moscow State University, and Ovetjkin brought the Cup there. And then Russia played in Sochi that night. And then, he brought the Cup to his old hockey school, Dynamo, and Moscow, where he played for the KHL team there. But at the same time, he also had these kind of, sweet and personal moments where he brought the Cup to, his late brother's grave, his old childhood apartment in Moscow. He tried to, he gets 2 days with it because he's the captain. It felt like still a very short amount of time that he was trying to pack everything in, and you could tell it was something that he'd been thinking about for a long time, waiting to get that trophy, but also what he would do with it once he got it. So it was pretty wild, some of the parties and, all the confetti that would come out when he would show up and the caviar in the cup, but it was pretty cool too.
Awesome. And I guess obviously the time Nick Bäckström spent with the Cup in his old hometown, it was probably a bit different, I can imagine.
Yeah, exactly. So, Yavle and, Bäckström are more kind of understated, right? Not quite as flashy. So the feel of the whole day is just different. And Nick sort of benefited from, Christian Djoos, I don't know how to say it properly in Swedish, having his Cup day the same weekend. So Nick almost got like a day and a half with it, because Christian wanted him to go to Gävle with him and, do all the stuff there and kind of share it all together. So yeah, it was much kind of different vibe, but still really cool. And especially when Nick had it in Valbo at Nick Back Arena, that rink is so small with kind of like the wooden bleachers and the wood panel ceiling. And I think only 6,000 people normally fit there, and there were 12,000 people who showed up.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was super cold. That's the coldest rink I've ever been to. But it seemed like he knew most of the people there because he just had kind of grown up around them. And his day was much more kind of intimate and, not private, but, it was, I think intimate's the right word for it, where it wasn't quite as, flashy, but it very much fit him. And, it was cool to see how much all of that meant to him too. I mean, those are the two guys that have been waiting the longest, as far as players on the Caps, and it was pretty special seeing both of them how they chose to celebrate.
Yeah, and you wrote a great piece on Bäckström too. Just capturing, I guess, his personality in a way that I don't think anyone has done before.
Thank you. Yeah, he was really great about giving me some time to kind of, talk to him, and he was willing to share kind of his story and kind of how he grew up, what he was looking at as far as like how he saw hockey as a kid and how that shaped him now as one of the best players in the world. And also he was really just kind of open about his childhood. And I felt like for, especially for Caps fans and also just, maybe fans of Nick Bäckström, you don't know that much about him outside of what he can do on the ice. He's a great player, he's super smart, but, where does that all come from and why is he kind of so private? And he was great about being open and honest and, maybe revealing some of why he is the way he is.
And he showed up on his bike, right?
Yeah, it was pretty funny. I was waiting for him outside of Gavli-Rinken Arena, and he just pulled up on the bike and said he, rode the 30 minutes there like he did as a kid when he was like 15.
That's amazing. I mean, you would expect someone to show up in a Ferrari or something like that, and then he shows up on his bike. I think that says something about him as a person too. Yeah,
exactly. My face was like so shocked, and so he was like kind of laughing at me like, oh yeah, I guess you haven't seen me like this before, because I was definitely thinking he was gonna just like pull up in a Mercedes.
Yeah. So the crazy summer is over. It's a new season and new expectations, obviously. I would like you to talk something about the Swedes. We have mentioned, obviously, Christian Djoos is I guess he's a regular on the Caps blue line by now. What kind of expectations are there on Christian? He played a pretty limited role last year. Could we expect him to play more this season?
Yeah, I think they still have him kind of on that third pairing, but he's the guy who you saw Michael Kempny get hurt these first two games, and he's the one who moved up to play with John Carlson. Mm-hmm. I think that speaks to sort of how they feel about him. And what I noticed in those two games was, A, like, he's still really good with the puck on his stick, but B, he seems like a little bit more stronger, I guess, a little bit more physical, which is not like something you think about with 170-pound Christian Djoos. You think like, he's going to get like pushed around a little bit, but I think he knows that's something he needs to bring into his game, a little bit more edge. And I felt like I saw that in the first two games, especially when he's playing more minutes and against better competition. But where his role has changed is I don't think he's a guy that gets pushed out of the lineup anymore. I think he's like pretty firmly their number 5. And it's going to be between Bowie and Orpik who comes in and who comes out kind of regularly. Mm-hmm. Right now, Christian's playing with Orpik, but that could all change with injuries. It could change with maybe them liking Bowie more, whatever the case may be. But I do think Christian is the guy who's going to stay in there pretty much the whole season unless something happens. And they really like him. I think, if you never want to see injuries, but I think if something did happen to John Carlson, I would love to see him on that first power play. Just because whenever I've seen him on a power play in preseason, he's pretty amazing on there. It's just hard to kind of break into that group when you have John Carlson and Dmitry Orlov and Matt Niskanen, but he seems like he'd be really, really good at it if they had him as like a specialist on there.
And André Burakovsky, I guess we've been waiting a few years for him to take the next step, and I know the Caps have been kind of frustrated with him. Can you see him evolving as a player?
Yeah, it's an important year for André just because, it's a contract year, but also, it's been 4 years now of kind of inconsistency, and some of that is not really his fault. He's been injured, hand injuries, that kind of take the guy out of his rhythm and everything else, especially when, you're kind of a skill player like he is. And he thrives on scoring goals. It's where he gets his confidence from. And I think when he gets pulled out of that rhythm and, maybe he goes through a little bit of a dry spell because it takes some time to get, the right feel in your hands back, I think then his confidence starts to slump and it just becomes like this devolving cycle. But they need him to kind of find some consistency this year, that there isn't these 20-game droughts where he doesn't score a goal and the rest of his play kind of suffers too. And that's the other thing is, it's one thing if you're kind of struggling, to score, but you can still play well, kind of outside of that. So I think that's where he needs to kind of show that he's matured, that he doesn't let a slump, really kind of derail him, and he can snap out of it quicker than he has in the past. But B, that, he's able to kind of finally show that production that they've been sort of waiting to see from him. They know he's a skilled player. I don't think they beat Tampa Bay in Game 7. Maybe if he doesn't score those 2 goals and the Caps kind of pull away in that game in the playoffs. So they like him a lot. Right now he's on a third line with Lars Eller. And I expect him to kind of stay there, but he needs to kind of show something because it feels like Jakob Vrana has sort of passed him on their like kind of forward depth chart, if you will. That Vrana's playing on the second line with Backstrom and Oshie, and Burakovsky's kind of struggled. He just kind of needs to stay healthy, and maybe he'll be okay.
Yeah. And also, there was a Swedish prospect who's playing with Hershey now, Axel Jonsson Fjällby, who became a fan favorite both at the World Juniors and in the Swedish Hockey League last season. What did you see from him during camp, except for his golden locks, I guess?
Yeah, that hair is amazing. Love it. No, he's got really good speed, which is great because that's where the game is going. I feel like nowadays, if you can skate, you're putting yourself in a really good position to have an NHL job in the future. I think they see him long term as like a fourth line energy guy in the NHL, but they definitely see him as a future NHL player. Mm-hmm. And who knows, if there are injuries, this season, he could make it up. But I think he's someone they're kind of playing for maybe full-time next season, and they like what they have there. They're happy with that pick.
I guess since I have you here, I think we need to talk about the Tom Wilson situation. Obviously, he was suspended for 20 games for the hit on Oskar Sundqvist of the St. Louis Blues in the last preseason game. I know they have appealed the suspension, but I guess a bigger sort of discussion is what kind of player Tom Wilson is and what he will be. I mean, the NHL pretty much put a pretty strong statement out there by suspending him for 20 games. Where do you think this is heading for Tom Wilson? Do you think he can change his style, or is this going to be like a reoccurring theme for him?
Yeah, it's a pretty big tipping point because he can't really afford to get suspended again after this. It's going to be something like half a season, like what we saw with, Rafi Torres years ago. I think he's a better player than people give him credit for. He's physical. He plays on the top line, though, and he is a really good complement to skilled players like Ovetjkin and Kuznetsov. He clears space for them. He's really good on puck retrieval. He's really good, that kind of physical presence coming down on the forecheck. Guys give up the puck, and that is why he's always played that way. He's effective that way. However, I think the Caps want him not to lose his total identity, but this is kind of a point where he can't do the things he was doing before. I don't know how he balances all of that. We talk about how fast the game is, how it's, these split-second kind of decisions, and, you're missing by inches or whatever, but, somehow other guys have figured out how to, not create these thunderous hits and not, have this frequency of injuring other players. And he hasn't. Some of that's his size, but he has to kind of adjust to all of that now, I think, and without completely losing his edge. So I don't know how you do that. I think to a degree, guys like him who play kind of that constantly physical style are bound to cross the line more often than not. But I think he has to be a lot more careful now. So I don't know how he changes his game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to follow and see where he goes with this. Finally, see, what do you expect from the Capitals this season? Do you feel like they could repeat?
Yeah, it's possible. It's before the Penguins, no team had done that in like nearly 20 years, because it's really, really hard to do. And, they have to deal with pressure this year. They have to deal with teams kind of bringing their best every night. I don't think they really dealt with that last year. And I think that helped them that, for a change, they felt like the pressure was off. And so it's going to be different for them, I think, in that regard. And there's also just more wear and tear from a short summer, from a long playoff run, and that will inevitably carry over into this year. But I do think they found a certain formula for success that now gives them confidence. And they brought pretty much the whole team back. They have a certain, chemistry, this group together. And there's also the whole aspect of relief that when they get to the second round, there isn't this mental block. It's kind of a weight lifted off. So I think all those things will help them. I don't know if that means they will repeat, but I don't think it's crazy to talk about them repeating. I think they have a really good chance of doing so.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. So Izzy, where can people find your work and plug some stuff?
WashingtonPost.com/sports. You can click the little Capitals button if you want Cap stuff specifically, but everything on the site is great. Just read the post; it's lovely.
And on social media, where does people follow you?
Oh yeah, at Khurshudyan, IKHURSHUDYAN. That's my Twitter and my Instagram. Instagram is really just if you want to see all my food pics, which some people might be interested in.
But I know we all have a hard time with your last name, so could you give people the right way to pronounce that?
Khurshudyan.
Oh yeah. So how often
you said it perfectly.
I'm not sure about that, but how often does people make the Kardashian reference to you?
Okay, so my college graduation, I was like preparing to walk across the stage, accept my diploma after 4 years, and they announced me Isabelle Amanda Kardashian. And I was like, oh my God, no. It was so embarrassing. And that night I was on Tinder, and, it only says, like, Isabelle K on there. But someone was like, are you the Kardashian girl? And I was like, no. Yes, to what you're referring to.
Oh, great. I love that story. Hey, Izzy, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on.